The Battle Beneath the Oak, a story of home, honor, and resistance. After 2 decades of living like nomads rotating between overseas deployments, military housing units, and cookie-cutter rentals, Morgan and Elena Whitaker finally stood in front of what they believed would be their forever home. It was a charming colonial-style house tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac in Alderwood Grove, a suburb with picket fences, pastel shutters, and every illusion of peace. For once, their son, Ethan, might have a chance to grow up with the same treehouse, the same school, the same backyard swing. But the real draw wasn't just the wraparound porch or the quiet street. It was the ancient oak in the backyard, an enormous, century-old titan whose limbs cast wide protective shadows and whose roots ran deep into the earth, as if daring anything to move it. Elena had fallen in love with it immediately. Morgan, a retired Army logistics officer, had imagined his son climbing it, hanging a rope swing from its thickest branch, even reading books in its quiet shade. It wasn't just a tree. It was a promise. So they signed the papers, moved in, unpacked memories from 100 different addresses, and began to settle in. It felt right, until the doorbell rang. She introduced herself as Madeline Pierce, the president of the Alderwood Grove Homeowners Association. With her tailored blazer, immovable platinum bob, and a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she handed Morgan a welcome basket filled with pamphlets, coupons, and a laminated copy of the HOA rules. Elena, standing behind her husband, caught the way Madeline's eyes swept over their porch, noting the stacked boxes, Ethan's bike, the imperfect symmetry of a family mid-move. "We have very high standards in Alderwood," she said in a sing-song tone, her voice laced with iron. "And we take appearances very seriously." Morgan tried to be polite. He really did. He listened as she listed grass height requirements, approved paint colors, mailbox dimensions. But when she got to the oak tree, suggesting they might consider removing it for uniformity, the soldier in him stirred. "The tree stays," he said firmly. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Well, we'll see. We encourage all new residents to be cooperative." As she left, Elena turned to Morgan with a look he hadn't seen since her days in counterintelligence. "That wasn't a welcome," she said flatly. "That was a warning." They didn't know it yet, but Madeline Pierce wasn't just a nuisance with a clipboard. She was a tactician of manipulation, and the HOA was her battlefield. 3 days later, they received their first violation notice, $50 for grass half an inch too long. Morgan had mowed 2 days prior. The lawn was perfect. The next fine? $50 for leaving their garbage bins on the curb 4 minutes past pickup time. Then came the complaint about Ethan's basketball hoop, even though it was neatly tucked beside the garage. It became relentless. Each morning, Elena would check the mailbox and return with another absurd violation. Every week, a new way to drain them. Elena, ever the strategist, began documenting everything. She started drawing schematics, tracking fines, mapping timelines. "This isn't about rules," she muttered, flipping through bylaws and city codes. "It's about power." Then came the SUV, a black one, parked across the street late at night, engine idling. Sometimes it would drive slowly past their house, headlights off, pausing just long enough to be noticed. At first, Morgan dismissed it as paranoia. But by the third night, Elena was watching from the upstairs window with binoculars, scribbling down license plates. "Surveillance," she said calmly. "This isn't random." And she was right. The SUV belonged to Raymond Knox, a former cop turned HOA board enforcer with a reputation for using intimidation as policy. Soon, he wasn't just watching. He began taking photos. Ethan couldn't bounce a basketball without Raymond creeping down the street, camera pointed at their home. Elena installed high-definition security cameras across the property. "If they want to watch us," she said, "we'll watch them better." And still, Raymond came. He escalated. One morning, Morgan found him inspecting the side of their house, claiming to be conducting a safety assessment. Elena confronted him with a copy of their property rights and a phone recording. He backed off, but not for long. The Whitakers weren't the first target. Quiet conversations with neighbors revealed a pattern: families who were harassed, fined, isolated until they sold their homes under duress. One family had left within 6 months of moving in. Another couple admitted they were only months away from putting their house on the market to escape the fines and constant pressure. Why? The answer came over beers on Daniel Moreno's back porch. A retired engineer and longtime resident, Daniel had watched the transformation of Alderwood Grove ever since Madeleine became president. And he had theories. There's a developer, he said, Parkstone Properties. They want to rezone the land behind the neighborhood commercial expansion. The oak trees are a problem. Heritage protected. If you cut down enough, rezone becomes easier. The Whitaker's tree wasn't just an eyesore. It was a target. The next assault came one quiet Thursday night. 2 men knocked on the door just after dinner. County sheriff uniforms. Eviction notice in hand. Multiple code violations, they claimed. Elena didn't open the door. She examined the documents through the glass. The paper looked official, but the county seal was slightly off. The signature was from a judge who had retired 6 months earlier. Elena, Morgan whispered, "This isn't real." She agreed. Calmly, she asked to verify their badge numbers. One man shifted uncomfortably. The other placed a hand on his belt, not a badge, but a weapon. That was enough. Elena didn't flinch. She held up her retired military law enforcement credentials and said in a voice that could melt steel, "Impersonating an officer is a federal offense. My contact with the sheriff's department is en route. You have 30 seconds to leave or be arrested." The shorter man cracked. "Raymond said you'd back down if it looked real." Real deputies arrived within minutes. The 2 impersonators were cuffed and taken away, and suddenly the HOA's little war had turned into a federal matter. The Whitakers reported everything. Elena forwarded all footage to NCIS and civilian authorities. Meanwhile, Morgan and Daniel poured through HOA budgets and discovered irregularities payments to Raymond labeled as security consulting, missing funds, mysterious landscaping charges that were never fulfilled. Neighbors, once silent, began to speak. Nancy Feller, the HOA's treasurer, confessed that Madeleine had authorized under-the-table payouts. "I didn't know what I was agreeing to," she whispered. "I'd have signed off. I'm so sorry." Evidence mounted. Emails, audio recordings, even receipts from fake arborists paid to recommend cutting down unsafe trees like the oak in the Whitaker's yard. Then came the emergency meeting notice. Madeleine, realizing the tide was turning, called an emergency session to vote on removing the Whitakers for community disruption. She had one last card to play, but Elena and Morgan had already prepared. They arrived early to the meeting, armed with boxes of documents, sworn affidavits, and video evidence. Officer Nadine Jeffries, who had handled the impersonation arrest, attended in full uniform. So did a federal investigator from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Madeleine began the meeting with flourish, waving fake reports and calling the Whitakers a threat to Alderwood's peaceful spirit. Her lawyer spoke in vague legalese, referencing court orders and community standards. Then Elena stood. She said nothing at first, just placed a series of photographs on the table. A copy of the fake eviction notice. Side-by-side images of the real judge's signature and the forgery. A bank statement showing payments to Raymond. Then she spoke. "In a few minutes, several of you will claim you didn't know, that you were just following the rules. But tonight, you'll all know. And what you choose to do with that truth will say more about you than anything else ever will." Silence. Then Officer Jeffries confirmed the open investigation. The federal agent quietly added that subpoenas had already been issued. Madeleine tried to interrupt, but Daniel stood and called for a vote of no confidence. It wasn't even close. The HOA board removed Madeleine by a landslide. Raymond resigned in disgrace. Parkstone's development was halted pending investigation. The oak tree? Protected by city ordinance within a week. Madeleine now faces multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud and impersonation through agents. Raymond took a plea deal, offering testimony in exchange for reduced sentencing. But the real victory didn't come in court. It came one Saturday afternoon, months later, under the very oak they'd fought so hard to save. Morgan and Elena hosted the first true neighborhood gathering in years. Not a staged HOA function, a real celebration. Kids played. Dogs ran through the yard. Elderly neighbors shared stories over lemonade and barbecue. Ethan, smiling and unbothered for the first time in months, announced the formation of the Oak Club, a group of local kids who would meet weekly under the tree to learn about nature and service. Morgan stood beside Elena, watching the sun filter through the leaves. "Ever think we should have moved somewhere else?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Easy doesn't last. The things worth fighting for never come easy." He looked around at the laughter, the connections rekindled, the families finally unafraid, and knew she was right. The war was over. The oak tree stood. So did they. And finally, for the first time in a long, long while, it felt like home.